All right, welcome back to episode 2 of the Boilermaker Breakdown podcast. I'm Joseph Hartzell, or Joey, I guess, and I'm joined by my co-host Ethan Woody. And after episode 1, which was largely football focused, we are now turning our attention to basketball, as quite a few Purdue fans do as the leaves start to turn brown, I'm sure. Um, Good squad, I would say, going into the year. Ethan, what are your initial kind of opening thoughts on this year's Purdue basketball team?
Yeah, I mean, it's the bye week in football. We're about a month out from the Kentucky exhibition game. It's kind of the time to talk about the preseason number one team going in. I mean, for a while there in the spring, it was like, oh, it's going to be Purdue, it's going to be Houston. Now it seems like people have kind of come around on, yeah, I think Purdue is kind of the consensus top team, which does scare me a little bit. I mean, the consensus top team hasn't done well in recent memory, but there's a lot of reason to believe in this basketball team. We have a lot of experience returning. We have some exciting young talent coming in. That's kind of the perfect recipe for a basketball season to get excited for.
Yeah, I think you summed it up pretty perfectly. This is one of the more on paper should be one of the more special seasons that Purdue's had in quite some time. Right up there with the Zach Edey senior year when they went to the national championship game, faced off against UConn. Um, Really, really excited for this group. I think this is kind of a new style of roster build. You haven't seen Painter dip into the portal or Europe or even really like high level freshmen the way Omer Mayer kind of is, compared to prior Purdue recruits. I think this is kind of new water for Painter. And so this is kind of, I've been very excited. This is kind of what I was hoping to see Painter do, build off of that high school recruiting. You have the development, you've got the star pieces, you trust the process that kind of put Purdue in the place where it's at. You've got Braden Smith, you've got Fletcher Lawyer, you've got Trey Kaufman-Renn. Now it's time to go fill in the holes that you missed, that you inevitably will always have based off of just high school recruiting, especially with the portal nowadays. You see such complete teams. You have to have a complete team to compete for a national championship. And I think the additions that we've seen Matt Painter make in the offseason have really kind of completed this roster in a way that I think it was kind of missing a little hint of that last year. There was a little slight reliance on the big three, a little too much in my opinion. And I think that, the additions are really going to change that. I'm really, really excited. But first, Matt Painter has been making some noise on the recruiting trail. I wanted to get into Purdue recruiting a little bit to start and get your thoughts just first off on the two commits we already have seen so far this cycle, and that's Luke Ertl and Jacob Weber.
Yeah, I guess I'll start with Luke Ertl. He's kind of been around a while at this point. Everyone in Purdue Circle seems to know his name. He committed last summer as sort of an unheralded three-star recruit. Very famously, was almost more of a football recruit than a basketball recruit when he committed to Purdue, and then sort of just blew up over the spring on the All Stars circuit and kind of made everyone look at him a little bit differently. I'm not. It's a little bit like taking one of those like prolific college scorers and projecting them to the NBA. I do think there's a little bit of a question mark of how much of his game can translate, at least right away, which is why it's good that we're so deep in the backcourt his freshman year. He won't be relied upon to kind of sort of carry the scoring load. And then if he can, then that just makes the team that much more awesome. He's sort of an undersized combo guard. Again, not exactly the prototype that always succeeds, but man, he's a bucket. There's not that many guys in this you would take over him if you just needed someone to get a shot off with 1 second left on the shot clock.
Yeah, I would say I think based on what I've seen so far, even despite, kind of you talked about that undersized nature, that in between kind of combo guard, definitely probably I would say a point guard, but he's definitely a scoring focused point guard. Like you have him when the ball's in his hands, it's for him to go get you one. It's for him to rock, and he can definitely do that. He's not a bad passer. I definitely think he's a capable passer. Nowhere near like a Braden Smith level passer. I know I've seen a couple of those comps kind of thrown around there. I just think they're kind of wildly different players. I would say, though, despite that small stature, he does kind of excel on all three levels. I think he's a solid finisher. I think he's able to finish at the rim. You've seen a little bit. He plays on the 3SSB circuit on Anthony Thompson's team, Indiana Elite. He's seen some real size and athleticism, and I think he's been able to kind of finish at the rim. I think my main concerns with him are kind of on the defensive side. It's almost like, who does he guard? I think he's quick enough that he ends up being able to guard point guards. I don't think that he is a particularly slow player by any stretch of the imagination. And something I really kind of look forward to is, I think if he is ready to play right away, I like the fit next to Omer Mayer. I think playing next to a bigger point guard will really do him a lot of favors. Omer's 6'4", 215-ish, I think is what he's listed at. So playing next to somebody with that size really helps you, because you're not playing two undersized guards the way you would be if you play like a Braden and a Luke Earl together. I'm really excited for him down the line. I think this is a guy that he's going to be at Purdue for 4 years. I think he's got a massive, massive role in this team for probably 3 of those 4. I think he's a sneaky redshirt candidate next year, depending on what happens with the rest of the recruiting class, actually. You talk about a team that if they bring Omer Mayer back, bring CJ Cox back, bring Jakari Harris back, bring Antoine West back, bring Jacob Weber into the fold, who I think is a little bit more plug and play ready right away. I think sneaky redshirt candidate for Luke Ertl, but it also wouldn't shock me if he's just completely ready and plays a big role on next year's team. But I feel like that's a pretty good segue into Jacob Weber, who's the second commit in this class. He's the higher ranked recruit, 6'6". I think by most accounts, he's one of the best shooters in the class. I tend to think he might be the best shooter in the class. Just ridiculous shooting numbers. The film pops off the page. You can run him off screens. He can hit shots off the dribble. I think this is a special shooter. I really get a lot of kind of Kobe Bryant vibes. If you want to stay in the Purdue pipeline, like a Ryan Klein type, just movement sniper. You can't give him an inch of space. He's going to get his threes up, and they're going to go in.
Yeah, absolutely. He's sort of the next in that pipeline of the Dakota Mathias, Ryan Klein, Sasha Stefanovic, Fletcher Lawyer sort of mold of he's the guy who's out there to shoot threes. Unlike Fletcher, much more like a guy like Dakota or Ryan, he's someone who's a movement shooter who you can run sets to get shots for. Though the one thing about Fletcher Lawyer, this is well known at this point in his career, is he's much more of a catch and shoot guy. So you run less action designed to get him running off screens, and the action's typically away from him designed to free him up in the corner or something like that. This is going to be a throwback to when we had, it sounds kind of funny given this is Luke Ertl, but Luke Ertl and Jacob Weber together is going to remind people, I think, of the Carson Edwards, Ryan Klein sort of combo in Carson's junior year. Ertl's game, I think, is more like Carson's than Braden's. He's not nearly as athletic as Carson, but sort of that 3-level scorer. Guy is not going to get you a ton of assists or rebounds, and is probably at best a neutral on the defensive end. He's out there to score, and he can do so effectively from all 3 levels. And then next to him, you got a guy in Weber, who's a shooter with a little bit of size. You can run him off screens. You can run action to get him moving. You can get him downhill going towards the basket a little bit, too. He's not just a 3-point shooter. I think the pairing of those two could be special.
You talked about the size a little bit too, and I think that's what really makes Weber unique when you talk about all of the kind of pipeline of the Purdue movement shooters. You talk about the Mathiases and the Kleins and the Stefanoviches of the world. Those guys were awesome shooters, every bit as good of I'm not saying Jacob Weber is going to be a better shooter than those guys, but those guys were all in the 6'4" range, and I think Weber's a legit 6'6", 6'7". This is a guy who is going to be able to shoot over people in a way that I don't think Purdue has really had guys who can just shoot over people. When you talk about these elite movement shooters, maybe my mind's off. I think Klein was the biggest at 6'5".
Yeah, I was just
even that.
Up.
I think Weber, there's a real pot. I think I've heard some accounts that he's up to 6'7" now. If he's 6'7", I think there's a world where you can play him at the 2. And you can just run a huge lineup out there a 6'7" guy that can shoot probably in the mid to high 40s from 3, I think on volume is just going to be an incredible player down the line for Purdue. And my hope for him is really kind of a Kobe Bryant-esque role. I think that is kind of the pathway that I really hope to see for him. I would love to see him come off the bench as kind of the 6th man, 25 minutes a game. And when he's on the floor to gun threes. Let him get 7, 8 threes up a game. He's out there to shoot, and kind of, you don't have to make him the number 1 option, but just this changeup, this microwave guy off the bench that, when you need a three, you put him in the game and he kind of delivers. And I feel like that's a good segue into kind of finishing out this class, the pathway forward for Matt Painter on the recruiting trail. I feel like there's kind of a set list of targets that Purdue is really down to when you talk about the 2026 recruiting class. I think Ralph Scott, a 4-star, the kind of 3-4 forward, really wing, is a very high priority target. I think he is kind of more of one of the higher likelihood guys. And in that same mold, you have the Bo Ogden, who is another high 4-star wing, more of a 3, but he's more the Jacob Weber mold of a shooter. He's out there to shoot threes. He's one of the best shooters on the in the 2026 class. Ralph Scott brings a little bit of a different feel. Then you move up to the 4 spot, which is going to be a big hole for Purdue next year, and that is Cam Williams and Rivers Knight are the 2 targets there. Rivers Knight's kind of a lesser-known 3-star, very, very recent offer from Purdue. He's playing at La Lumiere with Jacob Weber this year. Stretch 4, kind of a Liam Murphy build. This kind of stretch 4 can hit shots. He's a real redshirt candidate, I think, if he comes to Purdue. Then Cam Williams, complete opposite, just kind of 5-star, top 5 in the class monster. Got all the athletic tools, but he's a little bit more of a prospect-y kind of guy. Like there's flashes, but there's inconsistencies there. And then at the 5, you have 2 international bigs. You have Sinan Huan, the Chinese 7-footer, who is a high 4-star, came over and is playing prep in the DMV area, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you have Luigi Suigo, the Italian big man who's playing in Europe. Those 2 guys we'll talk a little bit about. They're also kind of in this weird recruiting battle, but I want to focus on Scott and Ogden for a second. Since those 2 guys really kind of overlap. They're both considering Purdue and Tennessee. Those are kind of the 2 main schools for both of them. Ralph Scott also has Houston and Texas A&M interested in him in his Final Four. And Bo Ogden has Texas as well, which I think is actually the favorite in that recruitment, given that his dad, I believe, is the GM of Texas basketball, and he's from Austin. Mm-hmm. So I think Texas has a little bit of more of an edge there than I think either the 2 schools in the Ralph Scott commitment have. But Houston has really slow played this Ralph Scott commitment, and I think in a vacuum, he ends up picking Houston, but we're not in a vacuum, and Houston slow played him. In this recent Purdue push, they got involved very late, offered him very recently, I believe 2 weeks ago, got a visit, midweek visit, turnaround. And it sounds like he's kind of in decision-making mode. So if you want to talk a little bit about Ralph Scott's game, I'm very excited for him. I think he's a guy who Purdue stands a really high chance of landing, and I'm really excited for him.
Yeah, Purdue has a lot of momentum in the Ralph Scott recruitment, which is pretty exciting because he's the type of player we don't get that often. He's a little bit in that sort of Jaden Ivey, Miles Colvin mold of like this bouncy, athletic guard wing who just under Matt Painter has not been, especially in the last 10 years or so, just has not been a staple of his teams. But they always bring a lot of excitement. With Ralph Scott, what I think is exciting about him is it's not just the athleticism. It's not just sort of the theoretical upside. Like he's a shooter, right? He's not quite the level of shooter of like a Bo Ogden or a Jacob Weber, but he can knock him down. He's a 3-level scorer. Defensively, people have been impressed with his shot blocking, but I like how he moves his feet on the defensive end, which is almost a little bit more kind of what you're looking for, especially on the wing. Like the splash he plays always really exciting. But if you can't stay in front of your man, it's going to limit your defensive impact, especially in a Matt Painter system that really relies on defensive fundamentals. And, Scott seems like a kind of guy. There's definitely some untapped potential there. He's going into his senior season of high school. We'll see. He might climb up the recruiting rankings even a little bit further than he already is, sort of as a top 40 kid. But, it really sounds like Purdue's has room in this class for one more 3, one 5, and then maybe a 4 if things break right and they want to add one. So it's going to come down to Scott or Ogden. I think of the 2, I like Ralph Scott the most. Like you said, Houston slow played him, and if he wanted to commit to Tennessee, he probably would. He had plenty of opportunities to do so already. So it does seem like he is trending in the right direction, but we don't know for sure until the deal is done.
Yeah, for sure. We've seen weird stuff happen before. Mine recently goes back to Trey Thompson, who it sounded like he was pretty much a done deal for Purdue for quite some time until all of a sudden he wasn't a done deal. And definitely definitely can't, really rule anything out until guys on campus and practicing and on the official roster. As
On
Cannon catching was like a word about that, but a little bit more on
on
Scott.
that
Yeah,
note, real quick, on like getting some of those similar Trey Thompson vibes with Bo Ogden a little bit. Sort of like what I said with Ralph Scott of like if he wanted to commit to Tennessee, he probably would have already. You can say the same thing about Purdue with Bo Ogden. Like he's been a priority target for Purdue for a long time. It's sort of always for the longest time it's been, well, it's Texas or Purdue. Purdue's the better school, the better fit. Texas is where he's from. It's where his dad works. So he's going to pick between the two of them. He's taking a visit to Texas this upcoming weekend. You'll talk more about Ogden in a second. I want to get back to Scott real quick, but just want to throw that out there a little bit on the Bo Ogden stuff. We're talking about guys who had an opportunity to commit and haven't yet. He's definitely one of them.
Yeah, this feels a little bit like Matt Painter's developing a killer instinct on the recruiting trail. I think. I think he smelled blood in the water in the Ralph Scott commitment. And Ralph Scott is one of those guys. He doesn't have a ton of film out there. Really, the only film I've seen from him is from the NBA NBA international camp. I'm not 100% sure exactly what it was, but it didn't seem like it was the highest level of like high school recruit basketball. And I think that you kind of saw that in how Scott dominated that game. Like he was like the point guard for his team while also being the main rim protector for his team. And so it was kind of one of these things where he was just so dominant in all facets of the game. It was almost hard to get a ton of takeaways. But I think I saw some interesting comps for Ralph Scott. And I believe physically he's almost identical measurement wise to DeAndre Hunter when he came to Virginia. Now, obviously, grew an inch, put on like 40 pounds in his time at Virginia, kind of developed into this like lottery pick prospect. I'm not sure Scott ever gets there, but he's a guy who I think can legit guard 1 through 4. I think he's just a different level of defender that Purdue's hasn't really had in a while. Just the defensive upside, being 6'7", the long arms, the shot blocking instincts, the athleticism, the ability to switch and guard at the point of attack. Just a super intriguing prospect. And I think you're kind of seeing Painter move away from the limited guys, like a little bit of a Fletcher Lawyer, who love Fletcher. He's been a fantastic player for Purdue. And I don't want to take away from Fletcher, but I do think you've seen some limitations with his game, especially on the defensive end in a way that I don't think you really see right away with Scott. I think he's a little bit more of a two-way guy. And part of that is just kind of being in a new realm program-wise, being able to recruit a little bit higher profile guys that you weren't able to get in recruitments before. I think Cam Williams is probably the best player of these 6, but I don't think he's a realistic possibility at this point anymore. I don't think it's happening. And so out of the other 5, Ralph Scott is clearly my favorite prospect, and I also think he's the most likely one to commit to Purdue.
Yeah, I mean, he's currently out of the country on an international trip with his IMG team. So, there's not going to be a lot of recruit movement while he's not in the U.S. to talk to reporters and to meet with teams. But it sounds like he's ready to make a decision. So we could get one as soon as he gets back or a week or two following. I'll say this, the longer this drags out, the worse it'll be for Purdue. Like if he gets back from his international trip and isn't ready to make a move, to me, that would indicate that either Houston is trying to claw their way back into it and he's listening, or there's another team trying to pull up Purdue and sneak in here at the last minute. But Purdue has all the momentum right now. He moved a visit midweek to make sure he could get it in before he left. They just offered him about 2.5 weeks ago. This is a rapidly moving recruitment in the ways we've seen Purdue lose recruits in the past, and someone else comes in and does this a little bit like in Iowa and Trey Thompson. It's not something we've seen Matt Painter do to another program, sort of sneaking in here and grabbing a recruit late, which is an exciting development if he's going to start doing this towards some guys who are maybe a little higher rated than he usually goes after.
Yeah, for sure. I would be surprised if a school outside of the 4 that he has kind of announced as his top 4 sneaks in. I do think that, you talked about how Purdue snuck in there at the last second. The recruitment was still kind of open, though. I don't think he'd ever made any official cuts to his list. And since then, he has officially dropped the top 4, and it is Texas A&M, Houston, Tennessee, and Purdue. So I think it's pretty safe to say it's going to be one of those 4. I do agree with you, though. Purdue really needs to capitalize on this kind of really fast-paced momentum that they've picked up very quickly with Scott and turn that into a commitment before, you allow Houston to claw back into this recruitment and, kind of,
Hmm.
get a guy that really feels like he fits the Houston system very well. Which, I would love a guy like that at Purdue. So I feel like it's a good transition into the center spot because I think that's the other real position of interest at this point in the recruiting cycle.
Hmm.
Definitely, you kind of have two guys that are between two schools. It's Sinan Juan and Luigi Swigo. They're kind of both between Illinois and Purdue. Both have taken, I think there are a couple other visits. I know Juan's visiting Northwestern, I believe. I'm not 100% sure where else Swigo's gotten interest from, but I know that Purdue and Illinois were kind of the two leaders the last time we really heard about that one.
I
So,
believe Swigo also visited Indiana when he was doing his sort of Big Ten visits.
yeah,
So
that's right.
there's a couple others involved, but it sounds like Purdue and Illinois are the teams to watch.
Yeah, and that's not to take away from the level of recruits. They're both pretty high level recruits. I think Juan's rated around 50. He's in the prep services. I'm not sure Swigo's in the 24/7 rankings at all, but he's one of the more high profile international recruits. Even outside of this year, just kind of in general, he's one of the more high profile international recruits. So both definitely some top guys. I think the Sinan Juan recruitment's a little interesting to me because he's not after kind of the traditional wants of most top 50 kids. I feel like he's been very open about wants a spot he can be at for a few years, wants a spot with good academics. That's important to him, a good family atmosphere. And I believe he's from China. I don't know if I believe he's from China, moved to the DMV area a couple
Mhm.
years ago. So he's looking, I think he's talked about looking for a place with a strong Chinese community, especially. And that kind of, doesn't hurt to have a guy like Zach Edey, who, um, Chinese Canadian big man, obviously very, very different players, very different play styles, but I really like Juan's fit. I think that he is a guy that you could see Purdue good as well. And I like his defensive upside. He's definitely more polished on the defensive end. I think he's a little bit limited on the offensive end currently, but I do think there's a lot of raw upside there. I think the defensive end's very polished. The offensive end has a lot of raw upside. What do you kind of get from Juan, who's kind of my second favorite target out of the ones remaining?
He reminds me a lot of what Jacobson was, Daniel Jacobson, Purdue center, was when he committed a couple years ago. Sort of this a high upside defensive stalwart. I mean, Juan averaged 5 blocks a game with the U19 event. Jacobson, I believe, broke Miles Turner's record for blocks in the U18 event a couple years ago. So, sort of similar caliber there. Jacobson has a little bit more of an outside game, even as a recruit, than I think Juan has offensively. I don't think you're going to see him stepping out and hitting threes, at least not right away. But he's sort of a lob threat guy who can make an impact rebounding offensively, but probably not a guy like Zach Edey or Travion Williams, or we'll talk about him a little bit later, but Oscar Clough, who's the guy you can just kind of give the ball to and let them go to work down low. He's more of a Daniel Jacobson, Matt Harms, even Isaac Haas, who will kind of fit around some other offensive pieces, but maybe isn't a focal point himself.
Yeah, I think something you're seeing is kind of a more lean into this high ball screen system that you've seen work so well for Braden Smith. I think that has kind of become very appealing to point guard recruits too. You see some pretty high level targets in future classes, talking about guys like Kevin Savage, who I believe recently received 5-star status in the 27 class. Jason Gardner Jr., who's another one of those guys who could really be one of the point guards of the future for Purdue. And with that, you kind of have some more mobile bigs. I think Jacobson and Juan kind of fit this lob threat, ball screen, mobile big mold that really play off of these high level ball screen point guards very well. I think, Edey was kind of one of one in his ability to move at that size. And if you're talking about a guy like Haas, who's just this mountain of a man, but doesn't really move particularly well, that style of big doesn't always play well in a ball screen offense where you have to be able to move your feet. You have to be able to step out to the perimeter, set the ball screen and roll and, have good hands and make decisions. And I think that Juan and Jacobson kind of fit that mold a little better of this kind of, you know, they allow you to have a really true lob threat big who can roll. And on the defensive end, it allows you to build around your center in a way that I think the best Matt Painter defenses have. You rely on this 7'4" eraser like a Daniel Jacobson to protect the rim, and you're able to build your defense around that. It's allowed you to kind of hide lesser defenders at times. I think back to it was easy to run out freshman Braden Smith and freshman Fletcher Lawyer on the defensive end when they could funnel their man to Zach Edey, who just kind of erased shots at the rim. And that allows you to play guys who aren't great defenders on the perimeter. And I think you're seeing this kind of this Matt Painter style, like the ever evolving Matt Painter style of basketball start to go down this path of athletic bigs who protect the rim, have an outside game, I think, on offense and are more on the mobile side. But with that, I feel like we've done our job talking about Purdue recruiting. Let's talk about the most exciting thing on the docket today, and that is the 2025-26 Purdue Boilermakers basketball team. Just kind of general vibes around the program, very, very high. How excited are you going into this season?
Personally, I'm always excited for Purdue basketball season. This is going to be fun. It does remind me a little bit of my senior year at Purdue, which was the Jaden Ivey, Zach Edey, Travion Williams year. There's a lot of excitement surrounding that team. It had a mix of guys taking a step forward, and Zach Edey in his sophomore year, Jaden Ivey in his sophomore year, senior Travion Williams. It was just this veteran-laden team. Ivy had been injured a lot as a freshman. And so it's this is a first full healthy year. This is his team. Feels a little bit more like that almost than even the senior year Zach Edey team, just because of how many different guys there are to be excited about. You have the three guys at the top, but then you have all these complementary pieces around them. And we're going to be preseason number one going into the year, which I don't even think we were Zach Edey's senior year. So this is a level of excitement nationally for Purdue that even those other teams hasn't seen.
Yeah, I would completely echo that sentiment. And I know you talked about the kind of veteran-laden team, and definitely you can't talk about this team without starting at the very top, because that's kind of what makes this team special. And that's returning two All-American level players in Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman-Renn, who I think are two of probably maybe three or four best returning players in the country. It's hard to compare like a Trey Kaufman-Renn to an AJ DeBonsa, just because AJ DeBonsa is probably a better basketball player, but who has the more productive and better college year. It would not shock me if Trey Kaufman-Renn has a more productive and more successful college year this year than AJ DeBonsa. And so out of the returning guys, I really think that Purdue has two of the three or four best. JT Toppin's up there, but Braden Smith can be National Player of the Year preseason. Then you add in one of, if not the best shooter in college basketball, in Fletcher Lawyer. Three seniors, been there, done that, been to a Final Four once before, won boatloads of basketball games, won boatloads of big non-conference games, won boatloads of tournament games, have won tons of Big Ten games, just winners all the way around. That's really the special part about this team. But I think a lesser talked about thing that really makes this team interesting is not only do they bring back those three, you bring back a pair of really, really intriguing guards in CJ Cox and Jakari Harris. And I kind of want to talk about them a little bit, especially to tie in with the newcomers, because everyone kind of knows what you're getting from the big three. You're getting just really, really good, really high level basketball from those three. But I think that kind of this competition for the third guard spot in the starting lineup, I think, is really interesting, because you have two returners who, Jakari Harris was the high profile recruit out of him and CJ Cox, probably had the slightly less successful freshman year. Still a lot of promise though, shot 40% from three in Big Ten play. We've heard a lot about him in the offseason. CJ Cox had some crazy flashes last year. You talk about the Alabama 10-0 run when he hit three straight threes and just lit Mackey on fire to basically kind of turn that game and win it for Purdue. Then you have the opening sequence of the Michigan game where he picks picks Trey Donaldson's pocket. He's yelling in his face. Immediately Purdue gets another steal. He hits a three into a timeout. Just lots of flashes from him. And then you have Omer Mayer, one of the highest touted international prospects you can have. Who do you think wins that battle for the third starting spot, and how do you see that competition of those three shaking out?
I think it's going to be CJ Cox initially. If you're talking about who's starting for Purdue in that spot in the national championship game, that's a different conversation. But if we're talking about who opens the season, I do think it's going to be CJ Cox. He was the better player straight up between him and Jakari Harris last year. I think, Jakari had a lot of hype last summer, and he did start the season as one of the starters. But pretty quickly it became apparent that CJ Cox was the more confident player between the two of them and was just performing better. Jakari had a good stretch in Big Ten play, don't get me wrong. But CJ Cox was a better player last year, and I don't expect Jakari's surpassed him yet. I think he kind of provides everything you want him to. I know he sort of gets tabbed as sort of he needs the ball in his hands, sort of go hunt shots kind of guy, which he absolutely can be. That's probably what he wants to do. But we found, last year he was just fine playing off of Braden and Fletcher and just sort of taking open shots. He's not afraid to shoot threes, which has been an issue for some of Purdue's complementary players in recent years. Even Jakari Harris last year was a little gun shy at times. He's going to shoot if you get him the ball and he's open, and that's what you want. You don't want guys who are passing up shots. Cox was not that. He's a little bit smaller than Jakari, but he's just as much of a dog on the defensive end. He can get up into the opposing players and point guards, ball handlers, and make them work 94 feet. I think coaches are going to see him when Jakari is the better fits next to Braden and Fletcher than Omer Mayer, at least at first. And we can kind of get into what we expect from Omer Mayer, but unless he's sort of hitting the ground running as this sort of transcendent talent that just needs to be on the court, if he's not playing to that level, I don't think he's going to fit. So until he gets to that point, I think you're going to see it's either going to be CJ Cox, Jakari Harris, and give me the guy who was better last year, had the better season, averaged more points, more minutes, better defensive play. If Jakari took a massive leap this summer, then I guess we'll just have to see it when the season starts.
Yeah, I think if the kind of Brian Newbert reports are true that Jakari did take a big leap this summer and is really pushing and kind of leading for a starting spot, that starting third guard spot, I think that just speaks to how good Purdue is. Like if Jakari Harris is good enough to push for that third starter spot in the backcourt, like, man, that really excites me because I think that says a lot about Jakari. And I do want to echo your sentiment. I do think that Omer does not start the season in the starting lineup. I do think that changes. I think you'll see Omer settle in and the talent went out. And I do think that he's the most talented of this group of three. I think he's the only NBA guy of these three. I think the fit is a little clunky at first and he figures it out. And all of a sudden, I think that you almost see like an unlocking like that. I think there's a national championship flip moment when Omer breaks through in the starting lineup and you see it really work for the first time. And it's like, oh my God, this team is everything we thought they were in the preseason. However, I do maybe tend to disagree with you a little bit on the fact that it's just going to be CJ right away. I think that I kind of put a little bit of stock into the Newbert reports. I think my view on it is if they're true, I think the path forward for it is Jakari is the all-world defender that he was billed to be last year and didn't quite end up being. And if the three-point shooting from Big Ten play holds true, I think a lot of our negative view of Jakari comes from a rougher stretch to start the season when he struggled very early as a freshman, which, quite frankly, he was thrown into the fire. True freshman starting on a top 10 team, and Purdue's non-conference does not allow you to get your feet wet and wade into the water. You're jumping right in the deep end. So I think that you saw not a great environment for a true freshman to come right away and start. And I think that a lack of development from a couple of other guys on the roster forced him into a starting spot he wasn't ready for. If he is the all-league defender he was billed to be last year, which I think he could be, and the shooting holds true, all of a sudden you have like kind of the missing piece that everyone claims this team doesn't have. And that's that like athletic Lance Jones type wing defender who can shoot a little bit, can do a little bit like off the bounce, is a little bit more dynamic, can get out in transition. And I think that Jakari is the closest thing to that, like kind of player archetype wise. And if he kind of took the jump and like is more ready this year, I think you see him really push for that starting spot early because he's the role fit that the Purdue staff wants. I think that's the guy they want to fill that role.
I can see it. I mean, it would push if he is ready to seize that starting spot. I think it would push everyone else into their more natural roles, right?
I
Where
completely agree.
CJ Cox can just come off the bench as sort of your sixth man, just gunning when he's out there, almost like a Denzel Aberdeen on Florida last year, where like, yeah, he wasn't starting, but he was out there to score and to play strong defense, and he was out there for 20 minutes a game. Omer Meyer, I think we'll have a longer conversation about him in a minute. I'm not convinced he ever starts on this team. Even if he's playing the way we all think he can, I think they might want him to be the guy who like checks in at the under 16 and just has the ball in his hands for 10 minutes in the first half or whatever, and still plays 25 minutes a game, even if they want to start out the games a little bit differently. But I'm a little skeptical that Jakari has taken that much of a leap. Like, I expect he got better. He's a true freshman who was thrown into the fire, was a lot better by the end of the year than he was at the beginning. I do think, though, that CJ Cox was a much better defender last year than Jakari Harris was. And that's part of why they went to CJ so much. It wasn't just because, by a Big Ten play, Jakari kind of broken out of a shooting slump. He was a good shooter in high school. I have no worries about that. I think he'll be fine. He's not the volume shooter CJ is, but they don't need that in that role. CJ Cox was just straight up a better, more consistent defender. He was recognizing screens better. He was getting over screens better. He was better attached to his man. He was making fewer mistakes, committing fewer fouls. Like, he was just the better defender last year. And I think that would have to change before they would put Jakari over CJ in the starting lineup.
Yeah, I think that's why when I do see the possibility of him starting, it is through that defensive lens where like he kind of turns into that all league defender he was claimed to have been last year. I think for me, I really see Jakari more as the guy that finished the year last year. I don't think that the Jakari Harris we saw through the first month and a half, 2 months of last year is at all indicative of the caliber of player he is. The shooting numbers were so bad. I can't get that out of my mind. And I think that trickled over onto the defensive end because to a certain extent, when you shoot like 9% or whatever he shot from three through the first 2 months, it has an effect on your mentals, on the mental side of the game. And so I think that I just see him more as the kind of player he was at the end when he was shooting at an almost 40% clip in Big Ten play, giving you, I would say it wasn't perfect defense by any stretch of the imagination. It was definitely, I think, plus defense. I think at the very least he is a plus defender. So all of a sudden, if you have this kind of 40% three-point shooter, I think he gives a little bit more length than Jakari. He's not really – I think he's like an inch taller. He's not that much bigger, but I think he's got longer arms. I think there's a little bit more upside athletically. That's kind of where I come. I think he's the higher ceiling guy. But I do agree with you. CJ was definitely better. And this is just the perfect segue, I think, to talking about really the superstar name of the group, and that's incoming freshman Israeli point guard Omer Meyer.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of alluded to this a moment ago, but there are many different ways you could find a role in this team. It's going to be really interesting to see how the coaching staff wants to use him, because I have no doubts in the talent. We're hearing there's a bit of an adjustment period right now in camp and practices, and that's to be expected. We're still 6 weeks out from the season. There's time for him to adjust, but he could be sort of this sixth man off the bench, come in, play 20, 25 minutes, play alongside Braden. He could be a starter where he's playing 30 minutes a game and is sort of like that fourth guy who's right there with Braden, Fletch, TKR. He could be a pretty limited backup. He's just not as ready as we all thought he'd be, and he ends up playing like 10 minutes a game mostly to give Braden a breather. That's possible. So there's a lot of different ways this could go, and even if he's living up to his potential, there's a couple different paths the coaching staff could take with him.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really all about how he fits off ball, about how the scoring translates. Because I think the sure thing is the passing, which kind of isn't exactly what Purdue needs this year. It's great down the line. Like he's an incredible passer, and that bodes very well for when he gets the keys next year. But I think the scoring has shown a little bit more inconsistencies throughout his prospect. I think if you're going to kind of look at his offensive game and nitpick, it's kind of the scoring. The shooting has been inconsistent at times. I do think he's going to be a good shooter. I think the shooting will be fine. I'm not concerned at all about it. But I think percentages in EuroLeague weren't great. I think he was like around a 33% shooter in the EuroLeague. Obviously, low volume on a pretty limited role, so that could change given more minutes and just more consistency in his role. He took a lot of tough off the dribble jumpers and really does not get to the rim all that well. I think you don't see a ton of burst from him in a way that just allows him to get to the rack with ease. And he's not a high flyer, kind of bouncy, I'm going to go put you on a poster, I'm going to go finish over the top of you kind of guy. And so that kind of combination leads to a lot of tougher layups at the rim and just kind of a lack of rim pressure in general. I know that he has talked publicly about him and PJ Thompson have had conversations about wanting to get that changed. And if that does improve, I mean, if he finds a way to get pressure on the rim and shoot the basketball at a 37, 38% or higher clip, I think unquestionably he ends up being the guy who plays the most minutes out of that group of him, Jakari, and CJ. I do agree, though, you could see a version of him where he never starts for Purdue. Well, not never, but doesn't start for this Purdue team. And I think that's the path forward is you could still see him playing 30 minutes a game and getting the most minutes out of that group of three. But the way he fits with the roster, it allows you to give Braden him be the first guy off the bench and give Braden a little bit of a break kind of at more specific times. Mm-hmm. But I do think that by the end of the year, the talent wins out. He ends up being one of the probably 4 most played players on Purdue this year. And I think that's really kind of how I see that position battle stacking up. But I think we've talked a little bit about the shooting guard position battle. I think it's time to switch into the other position battle I see in the starting lineup, and that's the center spot. Really, I see it as 2 options. You have the high-profile transfer in Oscar Clough, who is one of, if not the most productive big man in the entire country last year at South Dakota State, averaged 17, 13, and 3, I believe. Just ridiculous numbers in a albeit pretty weak league. And then you have Daniel Jacobson, the pretty highly touted redshirt freshman, broke his leg last year early in game 2. So we really only saw 1 game of him. The 1 game we did see, though, was good. It was 13 points, I think 7 rebounds and a couple blocks. You kind of got the Jacobson experience. Like he average rebounder, gave you a lot of like finishing stuff on the offensive end, but it was a lot of stuff set up by Braden Smith. And that's kind of what you expect from Jacobson on the offensive end. Protected the rim defensively. And I think he brings an element that this team really missed last year in the shot blocking. And I think that Clough ends up winning out the starter spot. I think Clough is just the more ready guy. The rebounding, I think, is going to be massive for Purdue. And another thing that I don't think has been talked about a whole lot is the passing upside of every single one of, I think, the 5 best players on this team. I think the best lineup on this team is Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, Omer Mayer, Trey Kaufman, Ren, and Oscar Clough. And I think all 5 of those guys are plus passers. And I think that that's something that hasn't been talked about. And you combine a lineup with that elite of passing, that elite of shooting, and a mind like PJ Thompson and a mind like Matt Painter, and you have the recipe for a very, very special offense.
Absolutely. I'm 100% with you. I think Clough gets the nod to start the year at least. That's honestly, I think at the shooting guard spot, they'll probably pick a guy and stick with him unless they want to like insert Omer Meyer into the starting lineup at some point down the line. I think at center, though, those guys could go back and forth in terms of who's starting throughout the year, maybe depending on matchup, or even if one guy ends up starting the whole year, who ends up playing more minutes might depend on what they need more, because they offer very different skill sets. I think Clough is the more ready player. He's the veteran guy. He was brought over here to start. Let's not pretend otherwise, right? Jacobson's still coming back from that injury, and it sounds like he's healthier now than he was over the summer when he started a little bit in the U19 event. But, you know, I think they're going to bring him along slowly. I don't think they're going to ask him to play more than like 15 to 20 minutes for the first month of the season. And if he gets to a point where he's just so elite defensively that he offers a level of upside on the floor that Clough doesn't, then, I'm sure he'll get the starting nod. But at least to start out, Clough is he's the man. He can do so many different things. I have all the talk about what to do with this backcourt. I have no idea how you try and stop Oscar Clough and Trey Kaufman run down low.
Yeah, I mean, I love the upside with Oscar Clough, and I think that's just the luxury of having him. Is it's like, if your high ceiling, redshirt freshman doesn't exactly hit immediately, you've got this plug and play redshirt senior, grown man, 7-footer who, at the very least is probably going to be one of the better rebounders in the country. He's capable of scoring the basketball. You can get him the ball on the block and he's able to post up in a way that, like, Purdue now has 2 low post scorers, I think, in their starting lineup. He's shown a little bit of an ability to step out and shoot the three. He's got a high free throw percentage throughout his entire career. I believe he was only like 7 for 17 or something like that from 3 last year. I mean, it was super low volume, but high percentage. The shot form looks good. We've gotten a little bit of propaganda from the Purdue social media accounts, posting videos of him shooting threes in practice and stuff like that. But I think that's where Jacobson could really kind of establish himself on the offensive end, is if he steps in and, is a high level shooter, which by some accounts he has been in practice. I mean, if he's a 38% 3-point shooter and an elite defensive big, it's really, really hard to keep him off the floor, because that just gives Trey Kaufman-Renn so much space underneath. And when you talk about a guy that you want to give space to underneath, the best post scorer in the country is not a bad place to start.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, Jacobson complements the rest of the pieces on the roster a little bit better. So, high, quote unquote, highest upside version of this Purdue team probably does include Jacobson taking over the main role in the front court. But don't sleep on Clough. I think Clough is going to play a huge role in this team. He might be the 3rd or 4th leading scorer on the team. There's going to be times where they use Trey Kaufman-Renn as sort of like a short roll distributor, and Clough is going to love that. He's going to love crashing down from the dunker spot and catching those little lob passes. TKR can do some like behind the back stuff if guys are over helping. Like, I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities for some easy points for Clough. Yeah,
I completely agree. I think that Purdue left. That was one of the biggest spots Purdue left points on the board in last year, was the dunker spot. I don't want to, kind of pile on Caleb First the way some people do for last year. I think he was far from the only issue on that team. I don't think it's fair to blame last year on him. And I think that he was better, like, in a lot of spots than people give him credit for. But I do think that one place he really struggled was finishing at the rim. And I think that that's a skill that Clough is not going to struggle with. Clough is not going to struggle with physicality. He's 7 foot tall. He's got really long arms. He's 270 pounds. He's strong. He's physical. He'll go up and put you through the rim. I think that that's a really good complementary piece to TKR in a way that Jacobson and Clough, I think, both complement Trey Kaufman-Renn very well offensively, but both in very unique ways. I think Clough is really this awesome dunker spot. Put him on the baseline. He's going to step up, catch some lobs. He's going to finish. He's going to offensive rebound. I think Jacobson can float out to the perimeter and really stretch the floor and hit some threes in kind of this unique way. And I'm really excited to see where this offense goes.
Yeah, our offensive upside is elite. I don't know if I want to get into the defense as much today. There's some question marks there for sure, but offensively, there's really no reason they shouldn't be the best offensive team in the country, which Matt Painter's been on record saying he wants to be. So if he wants to be, he's going to be with this group. I mean, the stuff you can do with Omer and Braden together, the stuff that, like, once you get Fletch off ball, like, teams don't want to leave Fletcher. They're going to have to. Like, there's no way you can devote that much attention to him when you have to worry about what Braden can do, what TKR can do, if Clough's lurking around there. So,
and I completely agree. And I think that's where the 3-guard spot is so important, because, I say 3-guard, that's kind of a weird term, but, in Purdue's system, I think you're going to see this Baylor style 3-guard lineup with a traditional 4 and a traditional 5. And that's the recipe you saw Baylor use. I think their guards were a little better defensively, but I think Purdue's guards have higher offensive upside. And I think Purdue's front court is better than that Baylor team, but that's a different conversation. And I really, kind of that if that third guard can be also like a 40% 3-point shooter, it's just, what do you do with this team? There's just so much that this team can hurt you with. And I think another thing I would not be shocked is to see tempo really increase. I think this team is so deep. You talk about, you have 2 different really high level point guards, in my opinion, in Omer May and Braden Smith. So you don't have to worry about running one of those guys to death, because if one of those guys gets tired, you sub the other one in, and ideally there's not a huge drop off. Same with the 5 spot. I know big guys have trouble running up and down the floor at a pace like that, but you have 2 high level ones so that you can really run at a pace that's a little quicker than you've seen Painter teams run at. And I think that with elite point guards like Braden Smith and Omer Mayer, transition, they're going to kill teams in transition. I mean, with passers like that, you get out in transition. Braden Smith loves transition. I mean, he's not a Terrence Shannon like athlete kind of guy that likes transition, but he loves getting out and running, getting numbers, being able to be creative in the open court. That's his kind of style of game, where he's almost at his best. I mean, as good as he is in the pick and roll, he's incredible in the fast break. So I think tempo could really increase. And on that depth note, I wanted to talk a little bit about the forward depth. I think that's really the one spot we haven't talked about that you'll see guys, get in the rotation. And I think that the 3 names that are really fighting for a few minutes at that like 3-4 spot are Jack Benner, Liam Murphy, and I think Riley Burgess is also kind of in that group. I think he's also fighting for minutes if he really breaks through and has a successful year. I think you could see him push for a few backup minutes at the 4. Liam Murphy is kind of the name to me. I think that wins out. Specialist, kind of on the elite shooting side of things again. 6'7", comes from North Florida. He's going to be a super high percentage guy. I don't think he's going to be a particularly high volume guy, just because I don't think he's going to be a high minutes guy. But I think he's the one who ends up winning out. He's the veteran presence. I think he was brought in for 1 year to play. I think he's brought in for 1 year to play 8 minutes, play his role. He's not going to be upset at playing 6 minutes a game, and that's what Purdue needed.
Yeah, he'll be on the floor whenever TKR isn't. And that's pretty much it. If TKR is having a productive game, he might only play 5 minutes. If he gets into some foul trouble, we might see Murphy playing like 12. But that's going to be his role. I think he's more experienced and right now a better player than Jack Benter, who's probably his primary competition for that spot. Murphy was brought in to play. I think Benter will probably take on a similar role next year, where he's playing like 12 to 15 minutes as like a Purdue's 8th or 9th man at that 3-4 spot. But right now, that's going to be Liam Murphy. On Riley Burgess, I think I'm not convinced he can play the 4. I think he is primarily a 5. So, you might get him alongside Daniel Jacobson in a couple blowouts or something. But I think for the most part, like if we're looking about guys seriously, like even if Liam Murphy wasn't like taking that role, wasn't performing the way they wanted to, I think you'd see Benter before they tried to like force something with Burgess.
Yeah, I think the real the only path forward for Burgess actually getting minutes would be like kind of showing a little bit more of what he showed in high school, where he was able to put the ball on the floor a little bit, move, kind of be like a second big, but more of a true power forward. You can step out, stretch the floor, put the ball on the floor every once in a while if he's got space. But I don't really see that happening. I hate to project this. I think Burgess is a real transfer candidate. I don't see a huge path forward the way Purdue's recruiting, especially at the 5 spot. I think they're looking to recruit over him. I don't think he gives Purdue exactly what they're looking for at the 5 spot anyway. I think it could really help him to maybe go down, maybe not even a level, but like go down within the conference, like within the Power 5 level, maybe not be at a top 10 program. I just think that'd be best for him in his career probably. But if he does manage to stick around, his joy is infectious. I would say he seems like a great kid. So if he does break through talent-wise, would be a guy you'd love to see stick around. I do think that to circle back on that conversation though, that Liam Murphy ends up getting it. And I think he fits that role really well. He's a specialist. He's not really going to do anything but shoot. But that's kind of like not a bad thing for a guy that's going to play sparingly. You at least know he's got an elite skill where he can come in and be a real offensive threat for a few minutes each game. And I think that's big for Purdue. Now that we've kind of gone over the rotation a little bit, I wanted to talk about the schedule. And I wanted to start with your most under-the-radar non-conference game that you're looking forward to this year.
Under the radar non-conference game. I think I was like, am I going to say Memphis? Yeah, I'm going to say Memphis. I think it's Memphis. I mean, that's going to be, I think, Purdue's first real big test against a team that's overmatched but still quality, right? Kind of like looking over the schedule here, like we have we're at Alabama second week of the season. Like that's obviously going to be like the premier. Like if we go and lose that game, suddenly all think pieces start coming out about like, oh, is Purdue not the elite juggernaut we thought they were? And if we win that game, everyone's talking about like, oh, see, we told you Purdue is number one. This is why. Like I think everyone's got that game circled. But sort of the next test is going to be in the Baha Mar Championship in the Bahamas. We got Memphis on Thursday, and we'll play the winner of Texas Tech and Wake Forest on Friday. And I'm sure the creators of that event and everyone else, all the other college basketball fans, are hoping for a Purdue Texas Tech final. But, Memphis is an interesting team. Penny Hardaway's squads are always a little better or a little worse than you think they're going to be. And this is the year that everyone kind of wrote Memphis off. They weren't able to keep their guy. Drawing a blank on his name.
PJ Haggerty.
PJ Haggerty. Yeah, he's probably the other guy you're talking about, like when you were talking earlier about like the 3 or 4 best returners. Like,
yeah, him and JT Toppin were kind of the like. I think I'd put Trey Kaufman-Renn over PJ Haggerty and probably include maybe Donovan Dent in that group. Like kind of the like returning All-American type players. Like it's really
those are the 4 returning All-Americans.
Yeah.
Period. Like it's those 4 guys. So if you're talking best returning players, like it is those 4. You're looking at, and so he's not on this team. He went to Kansas State. Memphis, like I said, they're always a little bit better or a little bit worse than you think they're going to be. And this is going to be sort of seen as a tune-up for Purdue with Texas Tech. Purdue didn't do super well with teams they were supposed to beat, but were still good last year. A lot of close games down to the wire finishes because we just didn't have the personnel to really sustain a beatdown over the course of 40 minutes, right? We're probably going to be favored by maybe as many as double digits against Memphis in this game, probably in the 8 to 10 point range. We'll see when we get a little closer, but those are the games Purdue should win comfortably. And everyone's going to be excited and hoping for the Texas Tech matchup on Friday, JT Toppin versus Braden and Trey Kaufman-Renn. That Memphis game is kind of the one I have circled of like, is this team different? Is this like the Zach Edey senior year team where against teams of this caliber, we would coast at 15-point wins pretty consistently? And that's kind of what I want to see in this one.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't know how familiar you are with Memphis this year. It's a little bit of a familiar foe at point guard. I don't know if you know who the point guard is.
Oh, I did.
He's a fun one. Had maybe some questionable academic history at a Michigan institution.
That's right. That's where Doug McDaniel. I know they got someone in the portal. They swapped with Kansas State for Doug McDaniel and PJ Haggerty. So clearly Memphis is not happy with how that went for them. But Doug is one of those guys who can put 30 on you and win a game against a better team.
Yeah, I think that's a sneaky fun point guard matchup. Like I think you have 2 guys who I think are very willing to go at each other. Like Doug McDaniel is definitely the kind of guy to be like, okay, Braden Smith, preseason National Player of the Year. Like, let's rock. Let's go. And I don't think Braden's one to shy away from that. I love that matchup. I think that's a great call out. Memphis teams are usually these Penny Hardaway teams, especially recently after the Amani Bates fiasco, have really been like this veteran. They're all 25, super athletic, long arms, kind of everywhere defensively, kind of junk, almost a little bit Diet Houston-y. Not as well
Yeah.
coached, I don't think, and not nearly as talented, but that similar style of like super vetty, super athletic. They're big, you know, kind of an interesting team. Like my under the radar matchup is Iowa State. I think to echo that sentiment a little bit, I think this is one of those years where like Otzelberger does better when he doesn't really have the like preseason hype. And I think everybody's kind of out on Iowa State, and they are still led by a veteran group. They return Taman Lipsey. They return Joshua Jefferson. That's one of those games that I think, as you talked about with the Zach Edey year, like that team beats that Iowa State caliber team by 15 to 20 at home and makes it look like a walk in the park. The last year's team wins that game by 2 at home, and you're like, oh, that was a tough, gritty win, but yikes, like there were some rough moments there. And
Right.
and so I think that's the one that really stands out to me, especially since those Bahamas tournaments, like all the pre like the Thanksgiving tournaments can be weird at times. And honestly, I'm not super high on Memphis this year. I don't think that they've got a ton for Purdue in a way that I think Iowa State like kind of does. Like I think Iowa State's got a little bit more top end talent. I see a Milan
I
Momcilovic as
agree.
a guy who could be a real matchup problem. I think they're going to play him at the 3 this year, and with Purdue's 3 guard lineup, that means you're going to see like a Fletcher Lawyer or one of the 3 shooting guards that you see starting at the 3 spot having a guard like the 6'7", 6'8", kind of fringe NBA wing. I mean, everybody claims he's an NBA wing. He hasn't really panned out perfectly yet, but there is that upside there, and he can shoot. And I think you saw a guy like Mackenzie Mbako, who's kind of that similar mold, give Purdue a lot of trouble last year.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Momcilovic is like a matchup problem for Purdue. We don't really have a guy in theory who can guard him one on one. He can get right by Fletcher if he wants to, so that's going to be interesting to watch. Yeah, I mean, the matchup between Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman-Renn and Diet Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman-Renn on the Iowa State side is going to be interesting. I think they're undervalued this year. They're like Iowa State. I think they're a top 20 team. Like they're probably not going to win the Big 12 in a league that has Arizona and Houston, of course, and then also Darren Peterson at Kansas. Like he could just win the league by himself if he wanted to. So, and then of course you got BYU, who's preseason top 5, top 8 team with all that talent. So I think they're going to fly under the radar even in their own conference. But this is probably a 5 or a 6 seed at worst, and that's the sort of like trappy home game. It's between the Rutgers and Minnesota Big Ten games, so it's going to have a bit of fanfare as like a marquee non-conference. But after going 2 scattered away for the Big Ten opener, which can be a little dicey, as we've seen in recent years with these Purdue teams, and I'm sure the Big Ten knew what they were doing with that matchup. All the narratives they're going to want to have in the pregame show. It's a little bit of a trap spot, and especially if Iowa State gets off to a rough start in this season, that's one that they could sneak up on you because there's a lot of talent on this team.
I agree. I do think the one thing that makes the spot a little less trappy is how low I am on Marquette. I don't think Marquette's going to be a real threat this year, and I think that game kind of loses a lot of its preseason luster when you think about that Marquette roster. And if that game, I mean, if you talk about a Marquette team that all of a sudden like has like a roster like last year and they come into Mackey and they're maybe a top 15 team, that Iowa State game might look a little more trappy. But I think now like that's one of the premier like actual non-conference, like confirmed non-conference games. With the Bruce Pearl departure, I kind of vault that Iowa State game over Auburn even. And I feel like this is a good segue to your kind of highest profile non-conference game. What's the one you're looking forward to the most?
I'll talk about non-conference games losing their luster. That Auburn, I was going to say coming in, I was going to say Auburn just based on how non-competitive that game was last year in Indy, and having the chance to maybe do something similar to an Auburn team that's not as talented on paper this year. But I mean, by the time they get through, they'll already have played Houston, Oregon, Michigan, NC State, and Arizona. Like, there's a chance the team already has 4 or 5 losses going into that game. So instead, I'm going to say Alabama, which even before Bruce Pearl's retirement, I thought was going to be the better team this year between the two of them. Talked about a lot less. Well, Baron Philon, I don't know why he's not getting more love. This was a guy who would have been, if they both declared, would have been drafted ahead of Tahad Pettiford.
Yeah, I
last
mean,
year.
I think LeBaron Philon was a legitimate like first round talent in the way that Yaxel Lindenborg was. And we're not talking about him the same way that we're talking about Yaxel. Part of that is how like well Yaxel measured at the combine and kind of how like freakishly athletic he is. But Philon is just this like he might realistically be the best guard that we see all year. And I don't think that's a stretch. I
Hmm.
think that he is the like highest NBA guy that we see all year. If I had to, if I had to bet, I think I would pick Philon to go ahead of Bennett Sturts in the draft this year.
Yeah,
And so
yeah,
I think those are like the two NBA guys, and you also had Todd Pettiford as like kind of the three really like first round NBA guards you'll see. And I think that that road game in Tuscaloosa, it's really your first big real matchup. Nate Oates, fantastic coach, especially with the Bruce Pearl departure. I would definitely agree that Alabama is the one I'm most looking forward to. I think that's the most measuring. No, I'm going to go with Texas Tech as the most measuring stick game, but I'm very excited for this Alabama game. I think it's the first real test. I think it's kind of the first time you see like, are the sophomores mentally there? Like where's Jakari Harris at mentally? Where's CJ Cox at mentally? Where's Elmer Mayer at mentally? Like, how does it's a really intriguing matchup at the 5 spot, I think, with between Noah Williamson, the Bucknell transfer, who's another highly productive like low major big transferred up. There's some real questions about how it's going to translate. I think Clough Williamson's a very intriguing, like under the radar matchup that we're not even really talking about because we're so focused on this Philon Braden Smith matchup. That's headliner caliber.
yeah. I mean, the Bethea injury hurts, obviously, sort of out indefinitely with I think a foot injury, if I'm not mistaken. So those can always be really tricky, um, especially in basketball. So if he doesn't play, that obviously takes some of the luster away from this matchup, kind of like we've been talking about with some of these teams. But I think Alabama, we're playing at Alabama, and a little bit like Purdue got a better Alabama team at home last year. We could see the same thing this year, where Purdue is going to be the team with all the hype coming in. Alabama is going to be seen as like the feisty home underdog. That's a dangerous spot to be in. Would not surprise me at all if Philon has some like 30-10 game and kind of stamps his mark in who I think is the most undervalued player in the like SEC Player of the Year conversation. Most of the time, you're talking about. Um, like one of
Take it away.
Arkansas, Otega Owe at Kentucky, one of the Arkansas freshmen, Tahad Pettiford at Auburn, maybe one of the Florida guys like a Thomas Haw or, one of their transfer guards. But I think Philon's the best player returning in this conference. I've been on the record before the hot take that Alabama wins the conference. And we'll see if they're able to live up to any of that. But regardless, it's definitely going to be a pretty, like you said, a good measuring stick for how Purdue is able to handle a tough, imposing environment with a player who's every bit as talented as they are.
Yeah, and I think that Philon is one of those guys where I think like sneaky All American, like first team All American candidate this year,
Mm-hmm.
especially with that Bethea injury. The load's really going to be on him to kind of carry this offense, I think, and be the main engine of everything this offense does. But to focus a little bit more on the Big Ten schedule, since Big Ten championship, I feel like is the first of kind of the big goals in front of this team is to win the Big Ten regular season. And I wanted to get your thoughts on what you thought the toughest Big Ten game would be for this team.
I think just on paper, Michigan is the second best team in this conference. We get them at home. It's the only time we play them is in Mackey. And we saw what happened to Michigan and Mackey last year, even a Michigan team that then later went on to beat us twice. Like it was a non-competitive, like 25-point loss for them in West Lafayette. I think the toughest game is probably at UCLA. For the same reasons, they tend to be the third best team in most people's estimation. A lot of the other teams you can consider to be in that mold we get at home, like Oregon, Michigan State. We only play those teams at home. Illinois, too, I believe we only get at home. So it really leaves the USC game. But I also think it's part of the toughest stretch for Purdue in this conference season, which January 17th, we're at USC. on Tuesday. 3 days later, on the 20th, we're at UCLA. So it's our West Coast trip down to LA. Our next 2 games after that are Saturday home against Illinois and Tuesday at Indiana. That, I think, more than any individual game, that stretch, I think, is going to be the toughest for Purdue.
Yeah, and I completely agree. I think that Michigan is the clear second best team in this conference, and I think is probably poses like the most question marks matchup wise on paper. However, getting that team at home in the middle of what's not the toughest stretch on Purdue's schedule, in my opinion, it kind of like that West Coast trip outweighs it, in my opinion. You know, you see teams struggle when they have to travel cross country. It is a really tough stretch, like you talked about. I think it's there's some trappiness in here too. Like I think if you see Illinois like have a really good year, I think Illinois is a team that no one's really talking about, but if that team hits 100%, I mean, you're looking at a top 15, top 10 team that might even be just straight up better than UCLA. I think the loss in Champaign last year, the way it happened, you know, a tight game like that, the kind of rivalryness that Illinois and Purdue have, I think that's an emotional spot where you can almost even, I don't want to say overlook the UCLA game because I think UCLA is really, really good and good enough that you don't overlook it. But it's this weird kind of, you have your two toughest games in that 5-game stretch, in my opinion, of Iowa through Indiana, sandwiched in between 3 really emotional games, I think. Like, I think Iowa's this really interesting game with the new head coach team that really you kind of like, I'm assuming, feel a little disrespected with on the Trey Thompson situation. You're probably licking your chops to get them at home first. And then you have to go to USC, who I think is a little better and people give them credit for. I think Chad Baker-Mazara is another one of those guys. And when you talk about matchup problems for Purdue, you don't really know who guards him. West Coast trip as well. And then you go to UCLA, who I think is the third best team in this conference. They have an elite point guard in Donovan Dent. I think they've got an awesome front court. I love Eric Daly and Tyler Bilodeau. And then at home against Illinois is obviously an emotional game. And then at Indiana, it is, I mean, no doubt an emotional game, especially with the struggles last year against an Indiana team that you probably thought you were better than and probably should have had a better result last year. I think this is a really, really tough stretch. And I think that's why UCLA is my pick for the toughest conference game. But to close out our time here, I just wanted to get one bold prediction from you on the player side of things and one bold prediction on the entire team side of things.
So you told me before we started recording that you were going to ask this question. I've been thinking about what I want to do for the players. So here's my bold prediction on the player side of things. Purdue only starts one combination of players this year. I don't know if that's more of a team takeaway or a player specific one. I guess you can decide and tell me.
I'm going to say that's team specific. You got to give me something for a specific player.
All right. But I'll start here then because short of injury, of course, put that asterisk out there and hope we don't have to deal with it. I think they're going to pick a starting 3-guard. I think they're going to pick a starting center. And I think we'll see guys' roles change as the year goes on. But I don't think that'll necessarily mean changes in the starting lineup. I think they're going to like if they start CJ Cox or Jakari Harris, they're going to like the defensive edge that brings early in games to set a tone. We might just see Omer Meyer 15 minutes a game, and then that grows into like 25, 30 even by the end of the year, but he's still coming on. And then same guys are going to be pretty locked into their roles. You know, if we see Jacobson start right away, obviously, but even if there was like a rock with the vet and Clough, I think more than the other, but combination.
I think to go off of that, my bold prediction for this year's kind of team specific thing is I think this team shoots over 40% from 3. I think that there are enough high level shooters that like the difficulty of a lot of these shots is going to be relatively low compared to what a lot of these guys are used to. I think a guy like Fletcher Lawyer is all of a sudden going to find himself with more wide open shots than he's ever had in his entire life. And I think that like a CJ Cox, when I think of the guys that Purdue isn't featuring, they're all shooters. Like every guy they bring off the bench is a plus, and I think, in my opinion, like a plus shooter. I think if you talk about the guys that you're realistically bringing off the bench, it's like C.J. Cox, Jakari Harris, Omer Mayer, Jack Benter, Liam Murphy, Daniel Jacobson. I think like the lowest percentage you see out of any of those guys is like 36% from three.
Yeah.
And like Murphy, I think, is going to be in the mid 40s. I think Benter, if he plays, is in the mid 40s. I think Jacobson is kind of touching that 40% range. I think CJ Cox is low 40s. I think Jakari Harris is like around that 40 range. And then you factor in, two of the better shooters in the entire country, Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer, who I think will be, mid 40s on volume. I think this is the best shooting team in the country. And I think that this plethora of options that they have is going to open up so much for the shooting on this team.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good one. I think we've been above that in a couple of
Have we
these
been above
recent
40?
seasons.
I might not have gone bold enough.
I think.
All right, if we've been above 40 the last couple of years, I think I'm going to switch it to, I think we're top 100. I think we're in the top half of the country tempo wise.
Oh,
I'm not
now
sure.
That's bold.
I'm not sure Painter has ever had a team that runs in the top half of the country. For ease of math, I'll just cut it off with like top 175. That's about half-ish. I think this team runs a little bit more than you're used to seeing a Purdue team. I think the depth shows through in that aspect.
It's a good one. All right, I'll go with my my player-specific one. I'll say Trey Kaufman averages 3 assists a game. Got my my TKR jersey here. Got to rep my guy. Lovely family. Yeah, I'll say 3 assists a game. I mean, he was over 2 assists a game last year. Zach Edey was over 2 assists a game as a senior. So we kind of see like Purdue's centers have opportunities because of all the attention they get for these kind of dump offs and kickouts to shooters. I think this team is going to utilize so much ball movement. I think there's just going to be a lot of assists going around in general. And TKR is going to get some attention down low. He's going to have opportunities to get the ball to Clough, to get the ball to Jacobson, plays that our centers last year weren't able to finish. And he's also going to be used as a little bit of an offensive hub. I know that gets a little bit of eye roll from some of the national media, especially when you have like the best passer in NCAA history and Braden Smith, and a guy who has been comped to Braden Smith as a passer come in and Omer Meyer. I don't think the offense is going to run through him, to be clear. But you get him on the short roll where he can make some decisions, kick it out to shooters, dump it down, go get his own shot if they're guarding him one-on-one. There's just going to be a lot of opportunities where he's going to be making decisions in the offense, and that's going to lead to some more assists. So I'll say 3 assists a game.
I like that, especially with the addition of like just the massive improvements on the offensive side of things at the center spot. I think that short roll passing game becomes a lot more prevalent. And you're not talking about a guy who's a bad passer. Like this is a guy with a 17% assist percentage last year. This is a guy who has shown an ability to play make. Like this isn't a guy that it's just randomly, all of a sudden we're gonna Jack Benner has all this playmaking upside. No, we're talking about a guy who has legitimately shown flashes of playmaking upside. I really like that. I think that's pretty likely to come true. Actually, I think you see some very interesting stuff from PJ getting the ball in Trey Kaufman-Wren's hands, sparingly, but like kind of this regular change-up style thing that they do.
He had the most, like, everyone loves the Braden Smith pass, but the most ridiculous assist that Purdue had last year was a TKR one. I forget which game it was. I have the video saved because it wasn't shown on any highlights, and I had to wind a couple times to make sure I was seeing what I saw. He had the ball on the block, on a low block, was backing his guy down, turns to face him, has the ball, throws a behind the back pass to the other opposite corner while throwing a post move on the guy. So like he gets the guy spin, throws a post move behind the back to the opposite corner. Guy drills a 3. It was that I was like, that's the sort of stuff that he can do, and he won't even have to get that fancy. I mean, these are going to be some like easy drawn up reads for him, and with like if all that shooting around him, like guys are going to be hitting shots.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that he showed. I think he has a lot of like Travion Williams to his game when you talk about like this ability to pass out of the post up. like in a way that a lot of post up guys can't. Like he can get really creative with like, kind of no look behind the head, little dump offs. He's a pretty creative passer, especially down low. He's pretty accurate. He's got pretty good touch on his pace. He's not just like rifling passes at guys from 5 feet away that they can't
Right.
catch. I like that pick. And I think to build off of that, my pick is that I'm going to double down on my Jakari Harris stock. I think I've alluded to it a little bit. I'm sure at this point that everyone watching this is going to see that I'm buying Jakari Harris. And I think that I'm going to like kind of double down on that and come out and say it. I think Jakari Harris shoots 40% from three this year. I think I buy the shooting. I buy last year, like the first 2 months being an anomaly. I don't think that's who Jakari Harris is as a player. I think there was some mental stuff there with being a true freshman, being forced in the fire. And not only do you talk about being forced in the fire, but Purdue showing like massive holes, flaws. They're losing a couple of games that, you didn't may not expect to win, but like we're favored to win. I think like that Marquette game was kind of a shocker last year, to the point where that's hard for a freshman when you're struggling like that. I'm sure he probably felt like he was a big reason why this team was struggling earlier in the year, and that doesn't help. I think that he figured a lot of things out. I think the defense took a leap, and I'm buying Jakari Harris stock. I think I'm buying 40% from three. Another one I wanted to throw in there, I think Liam Murphy. This one's pretty vague, so I didn't want it to be my main one. I think Liam Murphy plays a much bigger role on this team than like people are talking about. I think it's really matchup dependent. I think it's game to game. But I do think that there are several moments that he has this year where it's like, okay, this is a really valuable ad. This wasn't just like a depth luxury ad we didn't need. This is valuable. This guy has some big moments this year.
I mean, I can see him having a Mason Gillis game. Like Mason Gillis as a junior had that 27-point game where he hit 9 threes and broke Robbie Hummel's record in Mackey. I don't expect he'll have quite that level of game, just because even Mason Gillis never had a game like that again. But there could absolutely be a game where he hits 5-6 threes and wins Purdue a game when some of the other guys might be having an off shooting night or whatever.
Yeah, I think Trey Kaufman-Renn is a guy who dealt with a little bit of foul trouble last year. I think there end up being a couple of games, especially once you get into the dog days of Big Ten play, where Trey Kaufman-Renn picks up a couple quick ones. He's dealing with foul trouble all game. You're on the road at a weird, maybe you're in the Kohl Center. This feels like a Kohl Center type game. It just weird energy in the air, and the veteran presence, the shooting of Murphy kind of settles everything down, gives him a spark. Like he feels like a very calming presence guy. He feels like a very steady player. You know what you're going to get. He's consistent. He's probably going to play hard. He's happy to be there, but not in like a bad way. Like he's just happy to be there. He clearly wants to win. He's clearly willing to sacrifice to win. I think that is undeniable. Coming to Purdue, he clearly sacrificed personal role for team success. So I think that, Trey Kaufman-Renn has been susceptible to some foul trouble. That happens a couple times, and he comes in and kind of settles everyone down with some big shots and plays this kind of, calming presence role that this team could really use, I think, at times.
I think there's also a chance that we won't see this much this year, but I think there's a chance we see some lineups where TKR's at the 5 and Murphy's at the 4, and we just say we're going to blitz you offensively. We're going to play really fast. We get TKR on the block, 4 shooters around, 4 45% shooters around him, and good luck. If you decide to stay home on every shooter, TKR will just win one-on-one every time, and if you try and help off of him, then he got to pick a guy who can knock it down from outside.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that'll be a matchup dependent changeup, and I think that's a very kind of limited thing, like maybe 5 minutes every once in a while. But it is a really, really fun changeup to think about. It's a really fun, kind of interesting offensive lineup. So on that note, I feel like we hit a lot of our bases. Very excited for Purdue basketball this year. So thanks for listening, Boiler Nation. We'll see you guys next week.